Welcome to another episode of the Mideast News Hour. And as you can see, this week I'm joined by my friend and estimable colleague, member of Knesset, Amichai Chikli. Hey, Amichai, how are you doing this week?
Perfect, thank you.
Well, we're going to elections. Yes, well, I was glad to have you on last time you came to the show, and I'm very happy to have you on now because just for people who have been asleep for the past year, let me just give a little bit of an introduction on Amichai Chikli. So Amichai Chikli founded the Pre-Army Leadership Academy in Har Tavor. He's an educator and major in one of the special forces in the Army. And he joined with me the new Right Party under Naftali and Naftali Bennett and Amichai Chikli in the first round of elections in 2019. And that list failed to get into the Knesset. And then he continued on with them into Yamina, and he was elected to the Knesset in the fourth round of elections. And Amichai, he was number 5 on the list, and there were 7 seats. When Naftali Bennett decided that he was going to betray his voters and his pledges before the election not to form a left-wing government with Yair Lapid or to sit with him in any sort of rotation agreement, everybody in Yamina's faction, all of the members of Knesset, just broke their vows to the voters along with Naftali Bennett and Amichai Chikli, except for my friend Amichai Chikli. And for the last year in the Knesset that just dissolved, Amichai Chikli was basically on his own. He didn't have a party. He was formally still a member of Yamina and couldn't join another party. And so then in the end, what they did a couple of months ago, right, is that they held a hearing to get you forced to be called a defector, essentially, from the party, which stripped him of the ability to run in any other party in the next Knesset race, to try to punish him so that he would have to either form his own party and run, or just stay out of the election. So they were expelling him effectively from the Knesset with this move, claiming that he had betrayed the party, and he obviously defended himself by saying he was the only one who didn't betray what the party was ostensibly about, which was an ideological right-wing party. And then you just had a court case last week. You appealed the ruling to the Jerusalem District Court, and they said that you could run in another list in another party for the Knesset, but that you have to quit the Knesset. So you lose all your funding as a member of Knesset. And now the talk is that you'll be running in the Likud in a reserved spot that will be set aside for you. And I know that there's not been any formal announcement made or anything, so we're just going to maybe leave it at that. Is there anything else in your biography and particularly over the last year that you want to talk about?
More than enough.
All right. Well, one of the things that I wanted to talk about with you today on the News Hour was really what you went through, because what you experienced was you experienced it on your own back, was something that everybody else in the country experienced just as voters, which is, how do you deal with politicians who lie? And how can we protect ourselves from politicians who simply don't think that their promises to voters matter at all? When you were sort of beset, with the sudden awareness that the people you had run for Knesset with had decided to sabotage their own voters and the political bloc that they ran it within, what was your first response? How did you react to it? What was your first thought when you found out that Naftali Bennett was going to form the most radical government in Israeli history by far?
And at the beginning, before the government was established, and it was just an idea, and the mandate passed from Netanyahu to Yair Lapid, I wrote a letter to Naftali Bennett, and I told him, look, everything that we believe the Black Flags movement believe exactly the opposite.
The Black Flag movement were the wild protesters who were outside the prime minister's residence and throughout the previous year or so, right? Calling for Bibi's head on a platter.
The local, some sort of a Antifa style group protest, progressive, democratic, counter-Jewish. Basically, their message is, we don't accept the democratic rule, the game, the rule of the game. We don't accept the idea that the public in Israel are maybe thinks other than we, the elite, thinks, is not a part of a legitimate part of the game. And they're also very anti the idea of a Jewish state, of a Zionist state. I'm speaking now about let's say the edge of these protesters. So that's why I told Naftali Bennett, we cannot give them the victory. We cannot give them the power, because eventually it's not about yes, Bibi or not Bibi. It is about values, conservative, Zionist, Jewish, democratic values versus elite, anti-democratic, anti-Jewish values. So that's the dilemma, and you need to choose a side. And I think in terms of democracy, in terms of Jewish identity, Zionist identity, we must choose to stay within our allies, within our national camp, as we called it, with the Likud, with the Haredi party, with the Zionist religious party. And if the center party will accept the legitimacy of Netanyahu, who is still was not blamed, was not charged,
was not found guilty for anything, wasn't convicted of anything.
So we can also work with those parties, but we cannot accept the idea of saying that Netanyahu is illegitimate, because he's still the most popular leader of the national camp, and we should accept the rules of the game and accept the idea that we need to have a prime minister that have a major support. So that was the beginning.
And how did he respond to that letter?
So he said, let's speak. He wanted me to resign from the Knesset. He said, I brought you to the Knesset. You should resign and let me form the government as I want. And I said, look, I do feel responsibility for the party. I do feel responsibility for your success. I'm very glad that you gave me the opportunity to be a part of Yamina party, but we were very clear with the voters. You said on Zoom, on Facebook, on TV, on radio, you even signed a letter saying that you will never, in any constellation, not in mutation and not in rotation, you won't ever let Lapid be prime minister. You said that you will not sit with Meretz because they support the Hague, and you will not sit with Labor because of Ibtissam Marana, and you will not sit with with the Ram, that you said they are the sister of Hamas.
All true, by the way.
Yeah, and now you're saying that we are going to do the opposite of it. And I'm sorry, but that's a scenario that I didn't have it in mind. So when I told you that I will be with you, it was in the boundaries of our mission as a right-wing party that wants to challenge the Likud from the right, as a Zionist party, as a serious party, that when you say something to the voters, you actually mean it. And therefore, in this very radical situation, I'm very sorry, but I respect the voters, and I respect their voice, and I respect the democratic idea more than I respect you. And
It's
therefore,
interesting because you were criticized for throughout the last year, and including while they were voting to make you a deserter, so that you were supposed to be banned from the Knesset essentially if you couldn't put together a list that would get you 4 seats, which is almost impossible as a single person. That there was a dispute, right? That the left and Naftali and Ayelet and Matan Kahana and all of your and my erstwhile colleagues were saying, well, he's only in the Knesset because of Naftali Bennett, and he owes that to Naftali Bennett. And my qualm with that was that when I was running in the new right party with you under Naftali and Ayelet, I mean, they based the list on appointing me, on appointing you, on appointing others, and they were using us and our candidacy as a reason for people to
vote they for wanted you because they want to have the Anglo-Saxon community.
No, it doesn't. No, I'm not saying they wanted me to bring constituents. They wanted you to bring constituents. That was the whole point, that they believed that we brought voters to the party, and we did. Yeah. And that is the truth. And so when they say you're here because of us, well, no, you can say the contrary. You're here because of us. If we hadn't been going out every day and every night and campaigning all over the country for the party, for ourselves, and for you as the leaders of the party, then you would never have gotten elected to the Knesset. So that's one aspect to it. And then the other aspect to it is the moral aspect to it, which is, you weren't running as the Naftali Bennett party. You were running as the party that called itself Yamina, rightward, to the right of Likud.
It's interesting because when you looked at the website of Yamina, there was no website of Yamina. The name of the website was Naftali Bennett's Programs.
Oh, really? I never even bothered to
there
look.
Was no website for Yamina.
So then that seems to be on his side then. Look, we were presenting ourselves as a personal vanity project of Naftali Bennett, multimillionaire high-tech guy, right?
Yeah, and when I said to Naftali, look, I brought a matzah, like our policy paper about education. Let's publish it for the public. And he says, oh, I was already the Minister of Education, so we don't need it.
Well, see, but that would be a claim. That would be a claim on his behalf, right? They would say, well, it was really all about me. But if it was
it's all about Naftali Bennett.
So, well, everything is all about Naftali Bennett. But I mean, it does get to the heart, though, of a question about the nature of democracy, or certainly in an electoral system like Israel's, which has a lot of pathologies to it. And one of them is that you vote for a party as opposed to individual people. So the question is, are you voting? Is it that Netanyahu is worth 36 seats in the Knesset or 40 seats in the Knesset, and Yair Lapid is worth 20 or 25 seats in the Knesset, and Naftali Bennett is worth, at one time was worth 7 seats in the Knesset, now he's worth, essentially 0? Or is it that the Likud is worth 36 to 40 seats, and Yesh Atid is worth 22 seats? It's one of those questions. Are you voting for people, or are you voting for the leader? Or are you voting for an idea that the leader and the candidates are supposed to represent? And I think increasingly in Israel, particularly after what Naftali did by absolutely abrogating every single one of his policies, is that we're really talking about running for voting for a single person, even if he has a list of 120 people behind.
Look, it brings me to the additional conversation that I had with Naftali Bennett, and it was about exactly the framework to be prime minister with 7 seats in the Knesset. I told Naftali, what leverage do you have on Avigdor Lieberman? Could you force Avigdor Lieberman to pursue your economic philosophy, economic policy in the Treasury? can you be the leader of Benny Gantz with 8 seats and to actually do whatever we said we're going to do in Judea and Samaria, and especially in sea area? You said you're going to manage everything that concerned to the young settlements, ההתיישבות הצעירה, and you will make sure that they will have all the license and they will have electricity on the first
day in office.
First day in office. Could you do it with Benny Gantz? Could you fight the Palestinian and the European takeover on sea area? No, you cannot do it. Not to mention Yair Lapid, who will run the foreign policy of Israel and the relationship with America, strategic relationship. So you're going to have the name, you're going to have the title prime minister, but you're not going to be prime minister, not even for one day. And believe me,
exactly
you will be patient. Just be patient, and you will be the natural leader of the national campaign. But you need to wait.
Yeah, we all said that to him. I said that to him as well. I said, Shakespeare said it, Macbeth got a prophecy that he was going to replace Duncan as king. If he had just sat around and waited his turn in line, everything would have been fine. But, he had to kill him. And then everything went to hell in a handbasket. And that's what's going to happen to you. And he didn't care, and how do you explain that? Do you think that was just megalomania? What do you think? I mean, he really did nothing as prime minister. He had power over absolutely nothing. In the end, he didn't even have power over his own office. Everybody quit.
Yeah, I look at it always like in the Lord of the Rings. Can you stand the temptation of power? Yeah, it is exactly like in the books. And by the way, I think Lord of the Rings, they brought the story from Plato, from the Republic. There's a story there. There's a cave, not the famous cave that we all know about. There's a cave, and there is a king named Gyges, and he get into the cave, and he found this ring, and then he takes the ring and it makes him invisible, and then he can do whatever he wants. So he goes, kill the king, sleep with his wife. That's a whole fairy tale that reminds me of the Lord of the Ring and the weakness that we have as human beings towards power, towards fame. And I think that's the material of this story.
And it's so funny when you think about it. Not that I want to get too existential in all of this, but when you think about it, it's funny because the Torah teaches us that the thing that blocks you from that is God. It's faith in God. It's following the laws of God. And that's basically what keeps you honest. And here, the person who did this, the person who succumbed to the temptation of the ring, was the first ostensibly religious prime minister that we've ever had, who wears a kippah, who puts on tefillin when he's in Washington and he gets his picture taken. I mean, it's a stunning thing, really, that the one person who was unable to succumb to the temptation of power was the first national religious prime minister that we've had. And
he really forgot the very basic sentence from Masechet Avot, הקנאה והתאווה והכבוד מוציאים את האדם מן העולם.
There you go, exactly, from the Gemara that says that the jealousy, what is it, tina v'kinah and hatred.
תאווה וכבוד. פרקי אבות, זה המשנה.
Yeah, so it's from Pirkei Avot, and it says that that jealousy and wanting to be honored and hatred are all the things that make people crazy and do the worst things. And it's true. That is so here's the question. When you look at politicians today, we're going to be going to the polls soon. In November, couldn't be it can't be fast enough for me, but whatever. On November 1st, we're going to be voting. How do you think that the public in Israel, and frankly in other democracies, how are we supposed to judge, in your opinion, whether you can trust a politician or not? I mean, having gone through what you went through, did you take away any lessons of what you're supposed to do when you look at a person who's saying, trust me, vote for me, and I will do X, Y, and Z. How have you learned any sort of guidance that you can share for how people can even look at this and not be fooled?
So, two comments. First, it is very, very, very difficult to stick to everything you said. Okay?
Well, there's a wide expanse between, I won't do X and I'm going to do the exact opposite of everything I said.
What happened with Yamina and Naftali Bennett is rare, I think, in the history of democracy, not just in Israel. To take the prime minister with 7 seats to do exactly the opposite from everything you promised.
You're not exactly right. I don't want to interrupt you, but I mean, Ariel Sharon did it in 2004, right? I mean,
I don't think it's like Ariel Sharon. Ariel Sharon, he had one strategic plan. It was opposite from what he said in the past, but you can say because of a security crisis, he took one decision, a dramatic decision, and yes, he went against his voters. But in other aspects of his role, he was following his regular agenda. So it is similar, but not exactly the same. I think Bennett is more radical than Ariel Sharon, not in terms of the actions, because Naftali Bennett did nothing, but in terms of the shift and what caused to the shift. I don't think Ariel Sharon did the Itnatkut because
the withdrawal from Gaza.
Yeah,
because just to give a tiny little background. So in 2003, Ariel Sharon won a massive victory in the Knesset elections against Amiram. What's his name? Mitzna. Amram Mitzna was head of the Labor Party, and Labor's platform in that was unilateral withdrawal from Gaza, and Ariel Sharon ran against it. That was his thing, and he said that what happens in Netzarim is going to happen in Tel Aviv. By the way, he was correct, and that the Likud will never do this. And then at the end of 2003, in December, he announced in an interview to a radical left-wing columnist in Haaretz that by the end of 2005, there won't be any Jews in the Gaza Strip, and that he was going to conduct a unilateral withdrawal from there. And then he had a referendum among Likud voters in mid-2004, and he said that he would abide by whatever the consequences of that referendum were, and 60% of Likud voters voted against the withdrawal from Gaza, and he completely ignored them and went ahead with it.
No, but I don't think he did it because he wanted to be prime minister. It is a different case. It is a bad case, but it's different, I think.
I think you're right, because he was elected prime minister, and Naftali was elected the head of a 7-man faction.
Yeah.
I mean, the public said, we don't want you to lead. And the public told Ariel Sharon, we do want you.
Naftali forced the country, his leadership.
You're right. I agree. I mean, I felt that way every time that he appeared on my television screen as prime minister. I felt like I was being assaulted. But be that as it may, now we're going to talk about the second thing, which is really what we are going towards these elections. What I think that the stakes couldn't be higher, but I want to hear from you what you think that these elections are about.
Oh, I think the biggest issue is deep, and I'm not sure about the audience in abroad. It's a bit complicated, but I will try to put it in the most simple words. Few years ago, the president Rivlin made a speech. It was not his own idea. It was more Amnon Rubinstein, Professor Amnon Rubinstein idea to see Israel as a country that is divided to 4 tribes: Arab, secular, Haredi, and Orthodox, like Tzionut Datit. And he basically said, because the Arab tribe and the Haredi tribe are big and they're not Zionist, so the Zionist idea cannot stay the stick or the foundation for the state of Israel anymore. We need to have something else, which is the common good. הטוב המשותף, the common good. So we need to go into a more of a liberal, all-nation state.
Post-Jewish state of Israel.
Post-Jewish. Israel will no longer be a Zionist state, a Jewish state. It will be a liberal democracy. Everyone can feel nice. We all gonna sit around and do kumbaya. And that was the idea of the speech. And now this is the post-Zionist vision. Israel should go into another dimension of existence, another sphere. The new Israel Fund have this idea in its name, New Israel Fund. And there are two major problems in this idea, in this speech. One, the Arabs are a national minority. They're not part of what we call Am Israel. They have full rights as citizen, but they have no rights as a nation within Israel, although they requested the leaders of the radical Arab list, Ra'am, and the joint list. Second, Rubinstein and Rivlin forgot about a huge public, the Masorti public, who is bigger than the Haredi and the Orthodox, and they didn't mention this public in the speech because it breaks the narrative of the speech, because basically the Masorti public holds Zionism on his shoulder. He sees the Haredim as his brothers. He sees the religious of Gush Etzion or Yitzhar as his brothers, and therefore together they form a very solid Jewish national community. And the Haredim are far more Zionist than we think they are.
Than the Israeli left is.
Practically, yes. And so you have, on the one hand, you have the idea of Israel as a non-Jewish state, as a non-Zionist state. We will be a liberal state, but with no Jewish essence. And on the other end, you have all the people, religious, Masorti, national, secular, who believes in Zionism, who believe in the importance of Jewish identity. And I think that's the deepest question of the election. And then you have one more big question. How are we going to handle the situation with the Arab minority? The Arab minority is a big minority, 20%. Most of them are Muslims, 18% out of the 20. Out of this 18%, major parts, significant parts, are ultra anti-Zionist and anti the state of Israel. They vote or to the Islamic Party, Ra'am, or to the Joint List, or to the North part of the Islamist Party that doesn't take part in the election, but is very powerful. And we need to handle the challenge that we are facing, because their idea from the Islamic movement and the Joint List, their idea is that Israel should not exist as a Jewish state, as a Zionist state. And here you can see the bridge between the left and the Arab list, the bridge that we saw very clear in the past 6 months. Actually, we had a government that was held with Ahmad Tibi and Mansour Abbas and Iman Odeh, all the Arab leaders. And that's exactly what's going to happen in November if the national camp will not have sufficient power to win the election. And I think that if to summarize it, it is a war about the future of Israel as a Zionist state.
I couldn't agree more, and I just want to sort of underline what you were talking about, the Masorti.
The struggle, to be more accurate. War is a different thing. A struggle.
The Masorti majority, the traditional Jewish majority. Now, one of the concepts that's been distorted, or one of the distortions that American Jews in particular have grown up with, is this idea that the vast majority of Israelis are secular. And I remember growing up in a conservative Jewish family, thinking, that we were much more religious than most Israelis, because in 1973, when they were looking for everybody to bring them to the front on Yom Kippur, they found everybody on the beach. And this was a big, fat lie, right? That was told to American Jews, and I'm not quite sure why. Because the truth is that Israeli Jews, they have many of them go to synagogue, many of them don't go to synagogue, but the synagogue that the overwhelming, I mean, we're talking about over 90% of Israelis don't go to, is Orthodox. And it's just not true. You have a very, very high percentage. I don't even remember, we have to look at the polling data, but majority of Israelis keep kosher. They light candles on Shabbat. And you look at the Israeli Jewish observance in Israel, and there's another aspect to it that American Jews also don't really get, which is that Zionism is indistinguishable from Judaism in Israel. So that when you hear these BDS activists in the United States, and particularly American Jewish activists, for boycotting and ostracizing Israel and its supporters, you hear them say, well, Zionism is not Judaism, but it is Judaism for the vast majority of Jews in Israel, and it is, by the way, for the vast majority of Jews in the world. And it's just not true, and it doesn't strike anybody as meaningful, because there's no distinction for most people between the two concepts. So when you say also that Haredim are non-Zionists, or that Ruby Rivlin's concept, Rubinstein's concept, the Israeli Ashkenazic left's concept, that that these people don't even matter, that you can ignore them completely and pretend them away, and it's
or to count them with the Arabs.
Yeah.
People who are praying for our return to Jerusalem, who prays for the safety of the IDF soldiers, who are more and more participating in all sorts of frame parallel to military service, or in military service. We have now Haredis in Sanchanim, Haredim in Givati, and in Chel Modi'in, in Chel Avir. So I think it's a complete misunderstanding about the Haredi society.
Well, I mean, that's the thing, right? My husband was born in Morocco, and his parents, who came to Israel, they were illegal immigrants when it was illegal in 1960 from Morocco. They were refused. They refused Aliyah 8 times, and they ended up coming to Israel on forged passport. My husband was an infant, and his passport was for a 5-year-old kid. I mean, it was just ridiculous. His father was 20, and he had a 50-year-old passport. But the point is that they never read all of these fancy Zionist thinkers. It was that they went to synagogue, that our eyes should behold your return, your restoration of Zion in mercy. That's the pure distillation of the Jewish idea and of the Zionist
I must share a story. I once asked my father, who made Aliyah when he was 19, and he was born in Tunisia. After the 6-day war, they basically moved, sort of escaped from Tunisia to France. And when he was 19, he made Aliyah. And recently, I think 5 years ago, I have asked him, you never studied Herzl's writings, or Hess, or Pinsker, or Kalischer, or El Kalai. So what made you leave your family behind, leave your friends, your university, with zero understanding of Hebrew, and to make Aliyah and join the IDF when you are 19, why? And then he said, look, when I was a boy, my mom used to sit and watch TV all day long. Yeah, she was cooking, cleaning, and watching TV. And every time that something happened to IDF soldiers, she was sitting and crying. And I asked my mother, Ima, lama את בוכה? Why are you crying, Ima? And she said to him, the soldiers of the IDF are like my sons. And he said, if they are like your son, they are my brothers. And that's why I made Aliyah. And this is the simple Ahavat Israel of Amcha Israel. And it is more powerful than any philosophical
construct.
And that's the power of Jewish tradition.
And what's amazing here, and what's so sick, and what Israel is going through is so dangerous, is that here we had the president of Israel, Ruby Rivlin, who, of course, throughout his career, I'm seventh generation Jerusalemite, and he was this big Jerusalemite, and he was a big Likudnik, and he was again, and he was for settlement in Judea and Samaria and in Gaza and all the rest of it, and Jerusalem and rebuilding Jerusalem and blah, blah, blah. And then he gets to be president, and he comes out with this slop, with this post-Zionist claptrap that's total denial of everything.
Look, the sentence that I love the most in the Torah comes from Esther, Megillat Esther, Matanach, Torah. And in Megillat Esther, it says about Mordechai. And I'm saying that's why he called Mordechai a Yehudi. We have many leaders. We don't say Moshe a Yehudi or Yosef a Yehudi. Mordechai a Yehudi. And what's unique about Mordechai? Mordechai, כן, כתוב שם, וכל עבדי המלך, and all the slaves of the king, קוראים ומשתחווים, bending on their knees. Yeah. ומרדכי לא יכרע ולא ישתחווה.
And he wouldn't bow down.
Yeah, and that's why he's Mordechai a Yehudi. And I think that in a way, Naftali Bennett and Ruby Rivlin, with kippah, without kippah, they just bend on their knees to be accepted to the post-Zionist elite. That's it. That's the entire story.
And that's really
the Ivy League of Israel.
The thing that hangs in the balance now. It's so funny because I just bought Walter Russell Mead's new book on Israel and Zion, and then I saw it was 1,000 pages, and I just wanted to pull my hair out. But he did write a distillation of it in the Wall Street Journal a couple of weeks ago, and he talked about the centrality now of identity politics in Israeli culture, and he's the first actual American writer that I saw that was picking up on anything that's actually informing Israeli politics and culture today. So hats off to Walter Russell Mead, and I will read your 1,000-page tome, don't worry. But the point, and I'm sure that I won't like about 700 pages of it, but maybe 300 will make it all worth it. At any rate, the thing that's so stunning to me is that the balancing now, everybody's looking at the balancing, and we've had a year. And we're going to end this conversation with talking about where we are with Iran and the latest statements from Khamenei's advisor, who, by the way, met with John Kerry several times during the Trump presidency. But that's just a little bit of background. That this government has been so disastrous from an economic perspective. I mean, we have galloping inflation and cost of living going up way higher than wages, way faster than wages. This is in the United States, but here with our own pathologies, you have obviously you have a hostile takeover of the Negev and of the Galilee by irredentist, nationalist, Islamist elements in the Arab Israeli community that you were referring to, and this was all enabled by Bennett and by Lapid and by Benny Gantz. And you have Benny Gantz coming out with these extraordinary master plans for expanding Palestinian settlements inside of Area C, which is the area where the Jews live, where we live, for instance, and he's threatening the very existence of places like Gush Etzion, which is where I live, and the road to Jerusalem. He's opening it up to hostile enemy entities that he's building as defense minister. So, I mean, these are just, a tiny little bit of the damage that this government has done, and yet the needle isn't really moving on the polls. I mean, Netanyahu and the Likud and the right-wing bloc are still, going around 59, 60 on a good day. You'll get up to that magic number 61, but you would have thought that after this year of devastation by this government, that the polls would look far different, and yet they're not. And I before I give my sense of why that is, what do you attribute this to?
Look, I think that the major problem we have in terms of the polls and why that's the situation is most of the public understand reality based on what he sees on central media, N12, Kan, Galei Tzahal.
All of our left-wing media, they have a major monopoly.
They have some right-wing players, but they tend dramatically to the left. And also the academia, culture, it's to be sovereign, to be in power. It's not just to have a majority in the Knesset. It also who is deciding what's normative and what's not normative. So today, a party like the Likud, it's considered to be, it's someone from the elite would never vote for Likud. Oh, that's the Amcha, that's it's the lower classes party. So you have a phenomenon of right-wing voters of Likud that they will not say out in public or in high-tech companies that they are voting for Likud. They will be ashamed of it because of the media, because of academia.
No, I just feel like Naftali Bennett and Gideon Sa'ar, who just joined Benny Gantz's party, which is, and Benny Gantz has been the most radical minister in this government, bar none. I mean, what he's done with the Palestinians, what he's done with Israel's military industries. I mean, he just...
Yeah, he needs to receive Medal of Honor of Palestine.
Medal of Honor from Palestine and from the Pentagon, because he's just giving away all of Israel's technologies that the Americans are not capable of developing on their own, and giving them to a hostile administration who wants the worst for us. It's pretty amazing. The negotiations he's carrying out with Hezbollah in regarding Lebanon's ostensibly Lebanon, which is just a forward base of the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps at this point, controlled by Hezbollah, which is Iran's foreign legion. I mean, he's carrying out these negotiations that are going to transform Iran into an actor in the Eastern Mediterranean. And this is all him. This is one man wrecking ball to every single strategic interest Israel has. And let's not even get into, how many times he's blocked Israel from developing the capacity to attack Iran's nuclear installations. So Gideon Sa'ar, who's supposedly, to the right of Likud, and he ran in the last elections on illegal building in Area C, illegal Arab building in Area C, and wanting to come down very hard on it. And he was allied, the head of the Yesha Council, David Al-Khayani, is a member of his party, who just finally resigned. But here he is joining forces with Benny Gantz and pretending that he's a centrist. And all of these elitists on the right are more than willing to lie to themselves. At this point, it's not even the politicians who are lying, it's the voters who are lying to themselves. Mm-hmm. And, I just don't believe that people were as embarrassed about being on the right or being pro-Netanyahu 3 years ago. Look, something has shifted in Israel.
Yeah, the left dominates the language in Israel they shape the narrative with these terms of common good, atov meshutaf, with the idea of mamlachti. You have yamin mamlachti.
Yeah,
Okay,
I don't even think that there's
but
not even
you
a
don't
proper
have,
translation for this into
yeah,
English. It's such a
it is like
stupid word.
noble right wing.
Yeah, these
But
are,
you
well,
will
no, I mean, the mamlachti, it's like, the regality, it's a regal. It comes from a kingship, right? The mamlachti is a part of a kingdom. And the
yeah. So you
concept
have
is that it's above the fray, that it's not down dirty and fighting out the fights that need to be fought. They're above the fray. That's the concept. And it reflects, it's absolutely elitist, but it's also this concept that wherever the other side is, we're going to meet them halfway. So the problem is that the left has gone over the cliff, right? In terms of their anti-Zionism, their willingness to give up on Israel's most precious strategic interests, our existential interest, being able to defend ourselves by ourselves against people who want to annihilate us, and hand that all over to the United States, which is run by people who truly wish us ill, under the Biden administration and the Democrats, ruled now by progressives. And
yeah. So going back to the term mamlachti, you have noble right. Okay, I mean
noblesse oblige. That's what it is in
but you
French.
will never find a noble left. Why? Why? Because it is, everyone knows that
It's
to
taken
be
for
on the
granted.
left, it's to be on the higher ground in terms of moral and cultural aspect, and to be on the right wing. If you're just in the right wing, you are outside, you are banned. And but if you are yamin mamlachti, that we will hand the crown to the left, then you can be accepted. So my perush, yes, my translation to yamin mamlachti is this yamin who will take the crown, okay, and bring it to the left. That's
what's so funny
of
is
yamin
that,
mamlachti.
where I figured this out? I figured this out in 2008 when John McCain ran against Obama, because John McCain had been the Yamin Mamlachti. He had been the noble savage of the Republican Party throughout his career. I mean, he was the Republican that the New York Times liked, and they wrote nice things about him. And he called himself a maverick because he was willing to go against his party for the good of the country all the time. And then the Yamina Mamlachti, as this noble right wingers, the noble savages of the right, he became the presidential nominee against Barack Obama. And at that point, they began to savage him. The New York Times savaged him. The Washington Post savaged him. Network News savaged him, to the point where he decided to sabotage his own campaign, so that his top electoral advisors were campaigning against Sarah Palin. Because
it's amazing what you're saying, because it's the same with Naftali Bennett
and with Gideon Sa'ar,
who was the most loud advocacy, the biggest fan of Naftali Bennett throughout this year.
The media.
Ben Caspit, okay?
Yeah, one of Netanyahu's perhaps most frothing at the mouth, fire-breathing, completely nut job haters. He's the chief columnist from Maariv. I mean, the guy is
and now pay attention.
Unhinged.
A week after Naftali Bennett finished his role, he said on radio, Naftali Bennett is history. I was listening and I said, what? For a year, you're praising Naftali Bennett.
Hats off to you that you're able to listen to him. I can't.
We haven't finished the shiva of the president
of his premiership.
Yeah, and you're already saying his history.
And then that came out very clearly during Biden's visit, where they just kept shunting him to the side and making him look like a third wheel.
And wouldn't let them come into the assemblies and the meetings that they had.
No, he really is like a John McCain fellow, obviously even worse. But I mean, yeah, it's the same phenomenon. And it really just goes to show that it isn't about Netanyahu. And now when we're seeing the hatred just spewing forth in Likud voters and the Likud party, I see this member of labor in the Knesset, I can't remember her name, said, it's just terrible when I see what's happening in the Likud and how they're behaving. And if they did things differently, it would be different. And so somebody responded to her saying, oh yeah, because you were planning on voting for Likud as a member of Knesset from the labor faction. We're supposed to care what you say about Likud. But the problem is that this is the kind of thing that gets on television, and these are the kinds of people who get interviewed on. Yisrael Hayom, my former newspaper that went very far to the left with Bennett, and fired everybody who they thought had too many original ideas in their head. They said they had a big interview today with David El-Khayani, who was the head of the Yesha Council, who absolutely was fundamental in blocking Israel from applying its sovereignty over the communities in Judea and Samaria. So paving the way for Benny Gantz to give it all, tied up in a ribbon to the PLO. And he's not at all embarrassed about everything that he did. Oh, he did the right thing. Everything that he did was right. And he never betrayed anything by betraying everything. He's absolutely right. And Bibi, by the way, is just absolutely the devil. And so, hello, but that's the thing, is that these elections are tied because you have a very large group of right-wingers that we didn't have in the past that would rather form an anti-Zionist government with Ahmed Tibi and Mansour Abbas and all the rest of them than form a right-wing government that's ostensibly reflects their interests with people in their own camp because they don't like them from a social perspective. I used to say about Trump throughout, that people like my former editor, Bret Stephens from the Jerusalem Post, is now at the New York Times, and Max Boot and all of these other former conservatives who went over to the left under Trump, is that it wasn't ideological with them. Everything that Trump was doing in the Middle East and the United States, meant much of what he was doing in the United States, at any rate, economically, they supported. It was all that snobbery. They're just snobs. They just don't like being with a common man. That bothers them. They can't stand it. They don't have the right degrees. They didn't go to the right colleges. They're not fancy. What was it that they made fun of Sarah Palin about? That she went to University of Idaho and they went to Harvard. And so you can't have a vice president who went to University of Idaho.
Yeah, it's the same. It's the same.
It's amazing how similar people are in their, like you said, from the Mishnah, it's about jealousy and respect and hatred. These people, that's what motivates them. And so until we can make people understand that they should not be voting on that basis, we're in this horrible situation where the very fate of our nation is hanging in the balance. And let's just go to the last story of the week, which is the biggest one, which is that Khamenei's advisor said time's up.
And I think the public is sleeping, and is sleeping because of the media that makes the public sleep. They will never say directly when Arabs will hit and smash and kill a police officer in the middle of the road next to Rishon LeZion, Amichai Karmeli, or yesterday in another incident. And they will never say it about what's happening in the Galil, protection. They will say young people, but they won't say Arabs. So they will
Arab criminal
situation.
gangs.
Yeah, we have a problem with parts of the Arab population, and it's not a small problem. It is a major problem. And in the next war, as we saw last year in Mivtza Shomer HaChomot, Guardians of the Walls, the role of radical Arab nationalists in the Galil and in the Negev is going to be significant. And I think that it is likely that we are facing a war with Hamas, with Hezbollah, with Iran. And in this war, some parts of Arab nationalists in the Galil and in the Negev, they're going to take, and in the mixed cities like Akko and Lod,
In
they're going to be,
Jerusalem.
yeah, in Jerusalem, obviously, they're going to take a significant part in the war.
They already
And
did last year,
yeah,
so of
yeah,
course they're going
yeah,
to do
yeah.
it again.
And I think we should say it out loud and to say to the public, look, it is not it's not a game. It's not about who speaks nicely. Does Dudi Amsalem speak with the hand? Or Miri Regev, she said, I don't know what, some sentence was not okay. And that's, if that's what you think is the case, if that's what you think is the most important question of this election, you are asleep, because it is about who is going to lead Israel in the next war, a Zionist government or a weak government. And by the way, if we're going to have a Zionist strong government, maybe we can prevent the war from the beginning, because you can see that when you have a weak government, all of a sudden you see things that never occur in the past.
Well, I mean, it's the
Never in
same thing
the
that we saw with Biden, right? I mean, Biden comes here, he screws Israel, he screws Saudi Arabia, and the next thing you know, Iran is saying, "Oh well, we can form, we have the capacity to build nuclear weapons at will." Which, by the way, Biden's own envoy Robert Malley said a week ago to NPR. But so Iran is now openly saying we're a turn of a key away from a nuclear arsenal. We'll make one. And why are they doing this? Why are the Egyptians and the UAE and the Jordanians all saying they want to open delegations in Tehran? Because they see how weak the United States is. They were worried about the United States. And then Biden came here and said, you're right to be worried. Do something else. You can't trust us. I mean, that's exactly what just happened. And so obviously, if Israel is being led by people who are radiating weakness and listlessness and even anti-Zionism, then who would be dumb enough not to attack us? Who would be dumb enough to stand with us? That's what's so terrifying here, right? I mean, the people are so beset by who they hate and who they want to be seen with and who they want to be thought of as in their own mind or by their colleagues, that they can't see any picture. Forget the big picture. They can't see any picture.
Exactly.
You know what it reminds me of? Speaking of Lord of the Rings, I was saying this to my husband the other day. There's that part at the beginning, where the king of, what's the name of the big city that the big kingdom that has to be like the Americans, that he's the one who has to go and lead the war, and he's been taken over by the bad wizard, and he just sits around muttering all the time, and he won't do anything, and he won't send his forces to war, and he won't see anything. And I feel like all of these people who have just been, like, they've just been given shots, IVs of hatred towards Netanyahu and towards Likud voters and Haredi for so long, that they're like that king, like they just can't see it straight. They can't see anything. They're just sitting there corrupted. And it's very distressing. It's horrible.
Yeah.
But it's interesting. I heard some people say Amichai Chikli should run in the Likud primaries. He shouldn't just get a reserve seat. But I have to tell you one thing, I've been thinking about it. Just so you guys know, the viewers, I mean, I've known Amichai for many years, but I didn't say we hang out. We're friendly, and I looked askance at you. Actually, I have to tell you the truth. When you ran with Naftali and Ayala in the last elections, because I had become completely disenchanted with them after we ran with them in the first race. But I also never thought that they were going to do what they did. I just couldn't stand them personally anymore, and I didn't trust them as politicians, but didn't trust them like at the margins, not at the center. But I have to tell you guys, if anybody doesn't have to earn another seat in the Knesset, it's Amichai Chikli, because, you were by yourself. You were like a wandering waif, and you're fighting the good fight, preventing, if Amichai had not stood up to Naftali and stayed in the Knesset, because the number 3, the mayor of Sderot, he opposed what Naftali was doing, but he resigned. And so if he hadn't resigned, it never would have happened. He enabled it by resigning. So I feel like he's also responsible for what happened. But you were standing there by yourself this entire time and under so much pressure, and you didn't break. And he had these conferences against BDS, and he tried to advance legislation, and you were a tireless lawmaker. And while everybody else could just sit back and say, I'm in the Likud and I'm in this and I'm in that, you were fighting and you were proving your worth as a lawmaker and as a politician every day. And my hat just is permanently off to you. I think you deserve all the best, and I wish you great success.
Thank you.
I think that we should all just feel blessed that there are people who are honest, who have proved it, and you certainly have, and I consider you to be a blessing to our people. And so I thank you for your service, and I thank you for your continued service and what we can expect from you in the future.
Thank you, Caroline, for fighting and not giving up. And also paying prices for your agenda and your belief. And I think we share a similar story in different scene, but it's the same story.
Well, I guess that's why I like you. Anyway, listen, and of course we're both elitists, I mean, obviously, because right, whatever. Anyway, so that was a bad joke, but the point is just that I think we have to understand what's at stake in these elections. And because everything is at stake in these elections, the future of our country is at stake in these elections. And I just hope that enough voters in Israel are made to understand this, are able to understand this, to ensure that we don't put these people back in office again, and we get the leadership that we need to protect our country. So thank you, Amichai, and good luck to you in the elections. All right, take care. All right, take care.